I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the terminal left, and I'm pretty familiar with that. I'm taking 1960s history class, which made me really think about where the left is today.
Sure.
Like how do we look? I mean, I can have an idea. I just want to get you to your opinion. Like where is the left today?
Where is the left today?
That's kind of, it could be a broad, possibly the biggest question.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole
new
presentation on just that.
I mean, just I don't know. We can sum something up and something that comes to mind.
Sure. Well, I think today, I mean, the left has been since around 1980, since kind of the middle of the 80s, the left has been on the decline. When we all the kind of the rise of what we call neoliberalism, which is a return to free market policies, a return to pushing privatization, that all came about in large part with Reagan. I mean, that was a really kind of resurgence of the right that put the left on the back foot. The collapse of the Soviet Union was also, I think, a big blow to the left because, whatever else you can say about the Soviet Union, it was providing lots of support to, particularly in the third world, revolutionary and leftist movements that all kind of, were seriously put on the back foot again by the loss of that support from the socialist bloc. So I think from the early 1980s through I would say the late 2010s, the left had been in probably the lowest period that it's ever been in. I think now it's a really great time to be a leftist because since the financial crisis in 2008, more and more people are realizing that the problem isn't just particular policies or particular decisions that are made by leaders, but it's a problem with finance capital and with the capitalist system itself, and so more people are becoming open to left-wing ideas, and we've seen that with the Occupy Wall Street movement. I think was a big kind of turning point in the history of the left in this country when a lot of people were kind of coming out into the streets and not really having a unified approach, but realizing that something needed to be done and action needed to be taken. And so I think we're in a rising period for the left in this country and in the world. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add. That's just kind of my take on it, off the top of my head.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Do you think the Democratic Party still actually upholds the values of the left?
I don't know. Do you want to take this one, Ben?
Yeah, sure. I would say, frankly, no, and I don't think they have for quite some time. And when we talk about the left, really, we gotta understand what left are we talking about? Are we talking about the left of Democrats, or just the typical conservative liberal dichotomy? In a sense, I think a very positive development in the left, or just in society in general, since the financial crisis, has been people are becoming more disillusioned with the Democratic Party. They're starting to, especially with the Obama presidency, they're starting to realize more and more that the Democrats simply represent just another side of the same coin. They're just the left side of capital, really. And I think just like the 60s, when Johnson was president, people became more radicalized and disillusioned with the Democratic Party because you have a liberal Democratic president in office who is, bombing a country and destroying it, and yet at home we have all these social and economic problems. And I think very similar to that time in the 60s, we're facing that same kind of process today of people becoming disillusioned and radicalized because of a democratic and supposedly progressive president being in office and not meeting the demands of the masses of people. Are there any other?
This doesn't really a question. I do have a comment about, I'm sorry, I think you introduced yourself to me later and I've already forgotten your name. What is your name again?
Daniel Williams.
Daniel. I think you did a really, really exceptionally good job kind of like framing the problem, the funding crisis that's going on in the public university right now. You call it like the reprivatization of the university.
Yeah.
And I make this comment not to make it sound like that the narrative you offered or the argument you offered in any way implies this, but in response to being confronted with the changes that have happened in higher education over the last 40 or 50 years, I sometimes hear this kind of nostalgia being articulated for, why can't we just go back to the university, like the post-war university at its height, right, where all classes were being taught by fully funded full-time faculty. University presidents weren't making 8 or 9 times what they were making, or what the highest paid faculty are making, or just like the average faculty are making, as you showed in your graph. And what that misses, I think, and what I would like to articulate is that part of the rising cost of education, not all of it, obviously, I mean a good deal, a great amount of it is these kind of like these debt traps that you point out, or like the, kind of like the ballooning cost of administrative overhead. But part of it is that the university has, since the Second World War, acclimated itself, I think, to populations, trying to educate populations that are not traditionally, that haven't traditionally enjoyed the benefit of a college education, right? So, we have to keep in mind at the same time, while we decry all these problems that you pointed out, part of the rising cost of college education is now the fact that we frequently, for example, offer remedial classes for certain people who didn't get the education they needed in high school. We offer health services for students, psychological health services for students. All of these things do contribute to the overall cost of higher education. And the reason I point that out is because I would hate for our desire to solve this student debt crisis end up regressing in terms of the kind of like the institution that we've created, right? And the inclusiveness that it seeks to offer. So, I mean, all that points to, I think, ultimately is that the only way to alleviate the kind of like the financial burden on students is increase state funding. Right.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to kind of clarify that, I mean, that's the only solution. We're not going to figure this problem out by just going back to this older model of the academy, right? Because in some ways, even though it was more cost efficient, it was also very exclusive.
Oh yeah, definitely. And just a comment on nostalgia, really. You hear people, especially liberals, talk about, and this is even outside of education, the context of education, you hear like liberals talk about returning to the times when, people had, full-time jobs and, unionization was at a very high percentage, and the economy, basically the post-war economic boom. And when they talk about that, they really want to return to a time that we really can't go back to because the material conditions no longer for that exist. And the same thing applies with education, like you said. People can like dream about returning to a time in the past when education was wonderful, but of course exclusive to only a certain amount of people. But we can't return to that point. It's just nostalgia. What we need is systematic change, and with that we need not just increased. I think not just increased state funding of higher education, but complete free public higher education for all in this country.
Can you talk more about what your organization does?
Yeah, sure. You want?
Sure. So we just got started last spring, and the idea was that we were going to be an organization basically like SDS in the 60s, as well as the SDS that exists now, although not on this campus, unfortunately, I don't believe. And so we're a multi-issue, generally left-wing, student activist organization. We do educational events like this. We hold demonstrations and rallies. We do, you know, petitioning drives and different forms of activism to, you know, build movements around whatever the people who are currently involved are interested in organizing around. So far we've done a few events like this that are just kind of like educational and agitational events about education rights, tuition, and that kind of thing. One of the things we're kind of thinking about, or we're looking to move into, is trying to build a movement against this this fraternity that is now accused of drugging and raping young women at a party a week or two ago, and it appears that they were doing so in a rather ugly and systematic fashion. And it seems like we've seen that there's a lot of people on campus who are really angry about that. A lot of people who want the university to do more than I believe it has done. And so we're looking to kind of begin to build a campaign around that issue as well. But we're, you know, we kind of like try to keep our eye on all sorts of stuff. You know, if the war, the new bombing campaign in Iraq and Syria, as you know, we're keeping an eye on that, and thinking about, you know, how can we, as students, make our voice heard against the war, and so on. So I hope that helps answer the question. Sure. Okay. So now we're going to hear from, well, Oscar will introduce himself.